Pledge allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Mr. Bardaro.
Here.
Mr. Fernandez. Mr. Grady.
Here.
Ms. McNair.
Here,
Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Paradis. You have a quorum.
Anybody else? So we move to a motion to approve the July 25th, 2024 special board of finance meeting minutes. Motion to approve. Second.
Second.
Discussion. Favor?
aye.
Moved. Okay, Ken. Item
The first item on here is really for knowledge. We've issued the budget memo. We've started the budgeting process. And one of the things we wanted to make you aware of as you get into it, unfortunately, it starts out with some not so great news. The legislature was gracious enough to pass in Public Act 22-118. They published, beginning on October 1, 2023, they would change the way motor vehicle taxes are valued on the grand list. Currently today, they use the NADA book and you're able to look up values of vehicles. They're switching it to a manufacturer suggested retail price minus depreciation method. So the assessor's office went through and took the current grand list. So of course, next year will be different. I don't know that it'll be materially different, but what we have now is the vehicles that exist on the grand list, and they've used the new method to calculate it. And so you'll see in agenda item 1, year by year, the reduced assessed value. It's about $85 million on the grand list. To give you perspective, this past year, which had about a little over 2% growth in the grand list, was a growth list of about 55 million. So if you're talking 2 to 3%, this reduction would consume that. Now, I'm not suggesting that would go away. What would realistically happen, everything else being equal, is it would shift to real estate and personal property, or your motor vehicle rate would come up. You're well below the 3246 cap for the state. So, all of that would presumably go up as you kind of share this burden. Joe Ferraro, who's the town's assessor, is on. He's the resident expert. Obviously, this is a significant development as you go into the budget. And I didn't want to wait until March and say, okay, here's the budget and here's why your mill rate went up 2 mils or something and it's this much. Obviously Joe and his team will go through with the October 1 grand list like they do every year. They will assess the actual motor vehicles on that list from DMV and determine the actual amount. But I think this is a reasonable highlight coming into the process. Joe, is there anything do you want to add?
I might be some in that list that we gave you on code. There's certain items that we didn't price out because we're trying to get a clarification on taxable. For example, on code 11, utility trailers are now exempt. But within code 11, you have camper trailers that aren't exempt. So we have to go through them and price them out. And then code 10 is more of the commercial items. And I think they're supposed to give us their price. I'm not sure how that's going to work yet. They're just trying to fine tune the law now. And the ending of this month is a workshop that I'm sending the office to. And someone from OPM is going to be there. The Personal Property Committee from CAAO is going to be at the meeting. So they're going to go through motor vehicles and the new veterans exemption law as well. And if this list goes up, it might go up $5 million, but this is a pretty decent representation of what's going to happen.
The veterans exemption on structure, so not the land, but the structure.
Yes, okay, yeah.
Was changed so that anybody who is deemed disabled by the VA, and Joe was very astute at looking at it and realizing could be 10%, could be 100% disabled. they will have, Joe, correct me if I say this wrong, 100% exemption on their structure.
Yes, we sent out letters to the existing disability rating veterans, because when the law was changed, it also says it has to be permanent. So the files that we have, even though they have a disability rating, they may not be permanent disabled. So to get their structure exempt, they have to have the letter from the Veterans Division, and it states whether they're permanent disabled or not permanent disabled. So we
But it
sent
doesn't-
out
It doesn't have to be 100%. It could be even just 10%.
10%, but they have to be permanent. So
Yeah.
we have received about 50 letters so far. There's about 109 vets that have some type of rating, and a couple of them did come back where they're not permanently disabled, they just have a rating. So they would not be entitled to have their structure exempt. But we did the
guys-
worst case scenario, and I think we gave, Kevin has the worst case scenario on what would come off the ground list if every permanent disabled vet got their structure exempt. And that was about 15 million, if I'm not mistaken.
15 million. correct. And to be clear, because you may hear from some folks, why am I being asked to do this? You know, Joe's office reached out to, sent letters to everybody who's currently on. But we didn't believe it to be an onerous task. The VA has a standard letter that they would follow and send. So it was really asking veterans to get an update from the VA. It's not this, Joe, correct me if I say something wrong, but it's not an extensive physical or anything. The
No.
VA does this and they have a standard letter they would send out. We just want to make sure that we have best possible information. If all 100 plus veterans who are currently on there are entitled to the exemption, then they will get the exemption. But we want to make sure on behalf of all taxpayers that, you know, Joe and his office are doing their diligence to make sure that it is a fair representation of every person who's on that list. But that's, you know, together, that's about $100 million on a $2.5 billion grant list.
What do they get today for break or a tax?
Joe, what do they get today?
Well, it depends on the rating. There's a rating, but some get like $6,000 in assessment off their taxes if they have some type of rating. A typical vet without any kind of rating gets $1,500 of assessment. So they don't get very much. We did the math on the disability, and it's gonna run about $3,600 on an average per vet of actual tax dollar.
So that's tax dollars,
Yeah,
not
tax.
assessment.
Yeah,
So these are two laws we wanted to make you aware of. Obviously, that's something we need to consider.
And there could be others that you don't know of yet.
Absolutely.
yes. And we sent letters, actually, we sent letters to all the vets.
Okay.
What is the logic behind changing this from NADA rating to manufacturer? You know what a can of worms that is?
I think it's fair to say that this is a first step. I mean, the Senate passed the objective of getting rid of the motor vehicle tax. They did it at the 11th hour and the House didn't take it up, hence the special session and cleaning up some wording and other things. But ultimately, I think the longer term goal of some in the legislature is to eliminate the motor vehicle tax.
They were getting hammered by people that were outraged that their tax went up every year after COVID because their cars were appreciated.
Yeah.
Where forever, it was always they appreciated.
Right.
All of a sudden you had used cars that were worth more than what I paid for it new.
Some of the things the legislature talked about this past session
But
was
That's leaving us $2.5 million.
I know, it's not, it's right, it's
And
like.
once again, the state leadership
wonderful.
does something stupid and all of us have to fix it.
I know.
That's 2.5% cut off the budget.
and one of the ways they've talked about it.
Oh, yes, stupidity is the
Never
word, not
look at
unintended
unintended
consequences.
Well, they've talked about changing the 70% assessments of basically your appraised value times 70%, allowing communities to go to 100%. Essentially, it's gonna do the same thing. It's, you know, you
Right.
could raise your mill rate, you could raise your percentages. Those are just math.
It's a difference.
Should you raise your mill rate on just the cars?
You can have a different mill rate. You could go up to
We're probably
32.46.
gonna have to start looking at something like that.
I mean,
I don't see, I mean,
there are many towns who have, if their mill rate's higher than 32.46,
They
it
have
is
to go
different.
down.
It's just the motor vehicle's lower, and then the state pays you the difference.
it would be wiser to make, to target that, was it 32.6 is the state's number?
32.46. Yeah.
Because otherwise, we're just taking tax money from the people of Berlin to subsidize the cities with their car taxes. I mean, we're trying to be responsible with our budgeting, and we have to turn around and hand our taxpayers' money to places that aren't responsible. It's just crazy. We would be better off to probably look at doing the mill rate for the cars and trying to keep the property taxes more in line. We're gonna have to play this game that these whatever you wanna call it, morons.
And obviously, we've had several months. Joe and his team do a great job, like they do every year, assembling the grand list. And we'll look at the whole thing, but we just wanted to put this in front of you now, so there's an opportunity to think about it before we get to March. And if that's kind of the direction, we could certainly go there, and that's certainly viable.
We could look at that option.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely.
And food for thought also, there's not gonna be a supplemental list anymore.
There's no more supplemental motor vehicle?
No, they're gonna be sending it like quarterly or monthly. They're trying to iron out the details now. So
But
we
this
won't-
year there'll still be one?
the January, yeah, because that's for the 23 grand list. So the 24 grand list, there won't be a supple.
Okay.
If you look at the agenda, the way the public act was written, number 2, required the Department of Motor Vehicles to give municipalities a supplemental list of vehicles it registered on a monthly rather than annual basis, and modified the timeline for supplemental bills.
It's funny too, because I looked at the breakdown for the percentages, this goes down. People that buy new cars are gonna get hammered. Because you can get a car that's, let's say a pickup truck, you get $15,000-$20,000 off. When you buy it, you're paying MSRP.
Yeah, but the formula is actually,
Buy a car, drive off the lot, it's going, NADA is already down 30% the minute you drive it off the lot.
the formula works is more favorable towards the property. For the first year as a 2024, they're taking the list price, but they're taking 80% of that number instead of 100.
Okay, they are reducing it on that.
Yeah, it starts off with 80% on starting 2024, and then 70% of that number, and then it drops 5% per year on the depreciation schedule towards.
Oh, yeah, I saw that, but still, I mean, I think it's still gonna hit the higher end vehicle, newer vehicles harder.
Possibility, what we showed, it was most people got decreases. That's why the grand list came down, the motor vehicle came down so much.
In an ideal scenario, your car reduction would offset your real estate increase. But there's no way it can work out that way for everybody, because you have some people who don't own property who are gonna get a car break, so somebody has to pick that up.
But I do think you're right that they are trying to do away with the motor vehicle tax altogether.
We did, probably about, I think it was 10 years or something like that ago. We had to submit to the state, worst case scenario, if they did get rid of motor vehicle. And I think we added like 4 mills to our mill to offset the loss of the motor vehicle.
Well, with supplemental, Berlin is collecting between $8 and $9 million a year.
Motor vehicle.
So
That's
you're
just
easily
Berlin.
talking 3 to 4 mils if you were to just evenly offset it. Anyway,
Thank you.
Wish they would stop
Thank you,
doing
Joe.
these things.
thanks, Joe.
Oh, you're welcome. Have a good night.
You
Take
too.
care, Joe.
Bye-bye.
All right, item number 2. Motion.
Motion to approve $360,000 CPDECD municipal brownfields for forgivable loan for 55 Steel Boulevard, formerly known as 889 Farmington Avenue. And when all documents are executed to approve the loan, municipal brownfields loan account for 889 Farmington Avenue.
Second.
Second.
Discussion. Kevin, just a quick question. Who's responsible for this problem? 360 is coming out of the top, you're gonna do on, fund balance Who's ultimately responsible
For the brownfield cleanup, or
for the actual property?
right now the town is, because the town still owns the property.
Okay.
Brownfield, Jim, correct me if I'm mistaken, but the town will still retain responsibility for remediating the brownfield even after the property transfers for $1 to Newport.
So is the 360, is the 360 an estimate of the total cost to clean everything up?
Well, this has been an ongoing
Yeah.
process and there's been work done. The 360 was the additional amount that Jim and Loriero, our engineers, had determined based on where we stand with the project. The intent is to try to get B&W Paving, they're the contractor, they've been awarded the deal. There was sort of a holdup to kind of look at some other things. Now we're ready to go, but there's a $360,000 gap between the funding we have and the total cost. So B&W was given a purchase order and awarded to move forward with a cap below the 360,000. The non-budget appropriation is our attempt to move as quickly as possible to lift that cap and tell B&W, let's move and let's get this done.
So what is it, is the 360 total balance required, or is it going to be more than that? We don't know.
I'd say it's the projection now, but there's no guarantee. Jim, you and Mike, we had conversations with Mike, our Public Works Director as well, who's obviously actively involved in this as well.
I'm just curious, because I know you mentioned in here that you may want to use the other 360 for contingency behind the 360. So I was just curious.
Well, Jim had put it that way in large part because while we expect that number and it's a good estimate based on where we stand, brownfield carries with it even more uncertainty than most you would have.
I agree.
Jim, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, the only thing is like, when we applied for the additional state funds, they had limitations on what we could ask for additional contingency. So we really couldn't beef up our contingency back to where we wanted it. So we have about $100,000 left in contingency, given the 360 in. So hopefully that's going to carry us. But as Kevin said, and again, discussion with Mike Ahern, there's always some uncertainty with brownfields projects. So, I mean, I think one of the big considerations here is when we get the contractor back on site, we think this can move pretty quickly and wrap up. We're hoping to get it done by the end of the year or shortly thereafter. And when that gets done, then Newport's going to be able to start going up out of the ground and building their building. So it's really going to be fast, but what has to happen, Newport's doing a lot of things on their end. So while we're doing our remediation, they're putting in the site utilities and the footings and foundations that are going to be below our engineered control. So they're going to have a lot of, they're investing a lot of money. And at the same time, they're, pursuing finalizing their construction financing. They've already, hired the Nadu brothers to do the concrete, so we don't want to have another stop and start on this thing. We want to, once we get started, we want to get it done and, go as fast as we can and obviously do it for the least money we can, but it's to bring up, again, to bring in the additional contingency idea. If we needed it, it would be nice to have it when we needed it, so we don't have to stop the project again. So we really want to get this thing done. And again, I think that certainly, the town's committed to doing the project in terms of the geomembrane for the soil contamination, the geopiers to support the building, and so we're gonna follow through. So those are the conditions of the forgivable loan. So we think it's very highly likely that this loan is going to be forgiven.
Thank you. I mean, I know there's risk there, you know what I'm saying? I mean,
So the mechanism is the town council is going to appropriate $360,000 out of fund balance.
There'll be a town meeting on next Tuesday. If at that meeting, the residents who choose to attend and vote vote in favor, then it will go to the council, and then it will come to you at your October meeting to pull $360,000 out of fund balance for this project. And at that point, we will have the money and we will be able to tell P&W go forward. If you approve doing this tonight, the council has already approved it. If you approve doing this, then Jim can move forward working with DECD simultaneously to work through the loan documents. State loan documents can go quickly, or they can go, or they can take a while, so that the fund balance allows us to just move forward and get going while this is happening and try to get it done as close to the end of the year as possible.
All right, that's something. You said the town council has already approved it.
They approved it last meeting, correct, Jim?
Then they're looking for us
Loan.
to approve it, then it's going to a town meeting for.
That would be the debt. You're approving that we can move forward taking on the debt. The fund balance is a separate vote, and that will be voted on at the next meeting, the next council meeting. The council voted authorizing the town manager to move forward, signing the loan documents with the state. So there's sort of two things happening in parallel.
So then are we gonna have to come back and approve the use of fund balance?
Yes, that will be at your next meeting.
That's what I'm.
Is this critical enough where we maybe need to have a Zoom meeting just to do this one approval? And move the process forward a couple weeks ahead?
After
Instead of waiting
next
for us.
Tuesday.
I don't think so. I mean, you're talking the 17th to the 10th. It's not.
No, I mean, I think that we've signed the change order, it just has a cap. So they're gonna go forward as soon as possible. And what we're trying to do is get the GOP or contractor scheduled. Newport needed to do some survey work. That'll be done the end of this week, beginning of next week. Then hopefully, they'll schedule and get out on the site and start working as soon as possible. But I don't think we need to, have a special meeting because we're not gonna hit that cap within that time.
Between now and the 10th of
It's not
October.
gonna tie anything up. Okay, so that's all.
So the unlikely scenario where it goes south and the loan is not forgiven, then we're on the hook for a 10-year loan at 3%?
Yes.
Or can we at that point say, forget it, we don't want it?
Well, we'd be on the
We have to
hook.
hook for the accrued interest.
We'd be on the hook for whatever we draw down. So it's a loan drawdown. So if we don't need all of it, we'd be on the hook for that balance. I haven't seen the details as to whether there's an opportunity to buy out of it. So the town is going out for borrowing on the 24th for the police station for the first batch of the HVAC projects. Right now, 10-year AA rated bondholders just last week had a 2.5% interest rate on theirs. We met with S&P yesterday and it went well. I'm still expecting we'll be affirmed at AAA, nothing guaranteed, but we'll know next Tuesday. So I would expect, unless interest rates spike, which I see them going the other way, if anything, we should be somewhere in the 2.5% range. So we could potentially, if we had to, refinance it ourselves at a lower
Have to
interest rate.
forgive me trying to figure this out. So we're gonna appropriate $360,000 to be used from fund balance. That's just basically so we know that it's a pot of money sitting there if and when we need to use it. But if this loan goes fast enough, we actually would take that money out, we'd be drawing off of the loan.
We're gonna appropriate the fund balance and put it in the account so we can use
Okay.
the purchase order.
So
And
it's
then,
locked up, but we're not necessarily doling it up.
right, and then we can start to draw down on the loan if
Okay,
we choose to do
if
that.
the loan gets stalled, we start drawing out of the fund.
Because we want to make sure the project keeps going. And then if everything went our way and we didn't need to get into all of the 360, we could draw down less, put that money back in, all of it back in fund balance and have it. I mean, we talk about, we're naturally risk averse, finance, public works. When we do these projects, so we talk about what could go wrong. What's that?
Just think Jerry's not here.
I mean, we always talk about what could go wrong, but it is also possible that things could go better than we expected. I don't want to assume everything has to go wrong. Right, Jim? I mean, it could go
I
better.
hope so. I think the gods have got to be starting to be with us at some point on this
After all
project.
these years.
That's right.
All right, I'm good.
Favor?
Aye.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.
So. Quick update on a couple things. First, so through August, that's when we start to really look at taxes. We're in good shape in terms of the collection percentage. Office has been busy, folks came forward, it's done well. Health insurance fund, we've had a little bit higher claims than usual at this point. We have a lot of people on a high deductible plan, so typically this time of the year, you're not seeing the types of claims that we're seeing. They're not too alarming, but we were running around 25% of projected costs. Our projected costs are higher, so that naturally started the year less than 25%. We've come down to about 19, but there's still a solid reserve in there. The pension fund, the numbers look fantastic here, but I want to caution because it's last year's liability. By October, I should have the new liability, so I may or may not have it for the next meeting, but I expect those liability numbers will be higher and that 102% will come down. But I still expect us to be in and around the 90% range, which is solid, especially when you think historically where we've been. Two things, you know, as I pointed out on the third page, the 360,000 and the 75,000. I mentioned earlier, the 75,000 is to issue a grant to the Kensington Fire Department to purchase the land that is currently their driveway from Masson Ruggs, which will lock it up for them, and I think that's important for public safety. Both of those will be on the council, town meeting and then council meeting next Tuesday. Assuming they both pass both votes, then it will come to you guys for your October 10th meeting. Hopefully both of those, one, the project can move forward, and the other, Kensington Fire Department can make the purchase. Feel good about that. And lastly, VNA, recognizing their revenue is down, but I will say when you look at it through the first 2 months, while down year over year, we did take the revenue down substantially in the budget, and it is on pace right now for the $450,000 budget. Watching kind of closely because I think the next couple months are going to be indicative whether we are trending down, staying flat. I'm not sure we're necessarily going to see a big lift, but I am watching to determine that maybe the area of our first risk as we go into it. The good news, if there's anything, is that number that had been 650 to 750 each year is budgeted at 450. So by its very nature, it has to be less risky because the number's smaller. That's it for me, unless there's any questions.
And you also gave us the Board of Education report.
Yep.
Fine with that, but where's the second page for each one? There's no, it's usually 2 pages, of grant page and expenditure page.
She didn't provide the grant.
Somebody gave us the expenditure.
I will follow up and email that out to you.
Other than that, anything else? Second?
Hi.
All right.
Kevin, did you hire